Can humans become biologically immortal? Chapter 1. The door that refuses to close. On certain nights, when the lab is quiet and the humming of the refrigerators becomes a kind of rain, you can imagine that time itself is a liquid, cold, slow, pooling in corners, evaporating when the lights come on. In a shallow dish under the microscope, a translucent creature waves its tentacles as if conducting an orchestra only it can hear. Hydra vulgaris, a pale ribbon with a mouth at one end, a foot at the other, and in between, a nation of cells that refuse the ordinary script of decline. Cut it in half, and both halves regenerate. Slice it into 50, and 50 hydras wriggle into being. If you leave a hydra alone, well-fed, protected from predators, snug in a controlled environment, it does something scandalous by mammalian standards. It barely ages. This is where our question starts, not in futurist manifestos or chrome-plated cities, but with a creature barely more complex than a sneeze. Can humans become biologically immortal? The honest scientist has to say, no one knows, not in the way that one knows snow is cold or that gravity doesn't negotiate. But the honest storyteller, the one who looks for patterns across the living world, can say something more. Nature has already authored many poems in the language of longevity. The trick is learning to translate without breaking the meter. The question isn't really a single question. It's a braid of three. First, what is biological immortality? Second, why do some species flirt with it while others age on a schedule as strict as a school bell? And third, if we understand those schedules deeply enough, can we rewrite ours without tearing the page? Biological immortality does not mean invincibility. A biologically immortal organism does not die because of internal decline. It dies if something kills it: predators, infection, bad luck. In Hydra, the stem cells that replenish its tissues appear to keep dividing without hitting the replicative wall that stops ours. Some trees, bristlecone pines in the high western mountains, bear witness to 4 millennia of winters because the parts of them that fail can be replaced or compartmentalized while the organism persists. Certain jellyfish species, in a pinch, reverse their development like a narrative rewinding to an earlier chapter. Bacteria and yeast sidestep the problem by simply dividing. The line continues even if the individual cell does not. We are not hydra, bristlecone, jellyfish, or yeast. We are a mosaic of organs that do complex synchronized work: thinking, planning, grieving, dancing, falling in love. Our cells have limits. They are stitched to our sense of self. They accumulate errors and are surrounded by chemical whispers that set the pace of growth and repair. If we want to talk about human biological immortality, we must first talk about the ways a human body wears down, not to marvel at failure, but to map the terrain we would have to cross. Aging, at its core, is the drift of a system away from its blueprint. Imagine a symphony that begins pristine, every violin tuned, the brass bright, the percussion precise. Over time, the strings fray, the horns tarnish, the drummers tire, notes go sharp and flat, the conductor's signals are misread. The score remains the same, but the performance deviates. Aging is deviation. At the cellular level, several currents push in the same direction. DNA, the score, accumulates mutations, the occasional wrong note copied into the sheet music. In the beginning, you have crew after crew of proofreaders, repairers, and janitors. Enzymes that find mismatches, splice out busted parts, glue the helix back together. But the janitors miss things. The budget shrinks. The city grows. Meanwhile, epigenetic marks, chemical tags that decide which genes play loudly and which whisper drift with time. The orchestra can still read the music, but the balance of sections changes. Highs drown out lows, bassoons blare over flutes. Telomeres, the protective caps at chromosome ends, shorten with each cell division, like shoelaces fraying each time you tie them. When they get too short, cells enter a state called senescence. Not dead, not dividing, but metabolically loud, inflamed, and bossy. Senescent cells secrete a stew of signals that stiffen their neighborhood, call in immune cells, and change tissue architecture. A few senescent cells are useful, like orange traffic cones around a pothole, but too many and the street is impassable. Mitochondria, our energy factories, lose efficiency, generating more reactive oxygen species, tiny sparks that can singe protein machinery. Autophagy, the recycling system that shreds damaged parts for reuse, can lag, letting garbage pile up in the alleyways. Immune surveillance falters. The cops nap in their cars. Systems for sensing nutrients like mTOR and insulin signaling can stay switched on too long, constantly telling cells to build, grow when restraint would be wiser. If immortality were a house, aging is the creeping mold in the drywall, the slow roof leak, the rusty hinge on the front gate. If you wanted the house to last forever, what would you do? You would patch leaks early. You would replace parts. You would refresh the paint and tighten the bolts. You would keep records. You might even redesign some rooms to be easier to maintain. In biological terms, that list becomes reduce damage, improve repair, remove the cells that cause trouble when they stop cooperating, reset the epigenetic dials, and if we become bold, swap out old parts for new ones. This, essentially, is the modern longevity toolkit, an assortment of wrenches and gauges inspired by organisms that do certain jobs better than we do. Caloric restriction, eating less without malnutrition, extends lifespan in worms, flies, and mice by turning down the signals that say the buffet is endless. In lean times, bodies switch to preservation mode, boosting autophagy, improving stress responses, and prioritizing repair. Certain compounds, rapamycin for instance, mimic aspects of that state by toning down mTOR, the molecular foreman for growth projects. Destroying senescent cells selectively, senolysis appears to improve tissue function in aged mice, as if hauling out the bully kid so the class can learn again. Replacing worn-out stem cells with fresh ones or coaxing them to remember how to be youthful helps regrow hair, repair muscle, restore blood-making capacity. Then there is the shimmering lure of reprogramming, the attempt to roll back the epigenetic clock without erasing identity. In the early 21st century, 4 genes, OCT4, SOX2, KLF4, and CMYC, were found to push adult cells toward pluripotency, a stem-like state with possibilities as wide as a blank page. Apply these Yamanaka factors too aggressively, and you delete the page. The cell forgets who it was. Apply them gently, in pulses, and you might erase some of the scuffs while keeping the text. In mice, partial reprogramming has nudged older tissues toward youthful gene expression and function. It's a trick borrowed, in spirit, from creatures like salamanders that regenerate limbs without turning themselves into soup. If this sounds like a technical manual, it is, and it isn't. The technical details matter because biology is not magic. It's engineering with wet parts. But the dream beneath the details, the desire to step out from under the shadow of the hourglass, has a very human temperature. We are the primate who counts. We are the animal that names. We keep calendars, build monuments, write letters to our descendants. We pull out old photographs and argue with ourselves about whether we were really that young. Immortality tempts us not because we fear death alone, but because we love life, because our curious souls are not finished reading the book when the library closes. So can humans become biologically immortal? There are 3 ways to interpret the path ahead. The first is the glass dome approach. Eliminate the causes of death we can control. Clean water, vaccines, antibiotics, safer roads, better diets, exercise, sleep, stress management, the practical litany. These are not glamorous compared to gene editing, but they have added decades to human life. If you place a human under a metaphorical dome, free from infection, violence, and starvation, the internal machinery still ages, but the journey is longer, smoother. This is not immortality, it is good stewardship. The second is the maintenance and upgrade approach. Use all the tools we have or will have: senolytics, autophagy boosters, nutrient sensing modulators, stem cell therapies, organ replacements, tissue engineering, possibly partial reprogramming to keep extending the service life of organs and systems. If each decade comes with a tune-up that resets enough of the drift, then the curve of risk might flatten. This scenario doesn't promise infinity, it promises continuous postponement. If done safely and fairly, 2 very large ifs, it could turn an 80-year lifespan into 120, then 150, then beyond. That's not immortality as an absolute, it's longevity, escape velocity. The idea that repairs outpace damage enough to roll the calendar forward without a catastrophic breakdown. The third frame is the identity migration approach, in which biological immortality becomes less about the exact tissue you carry and more about preserving the pattern that is you. If your liver is replaced by a bioengineered organ grown from your cells, you remain you. If your blood is refreshed by stem cells edited to resist 9 kinds of cancer, you remain you. How many parts can you replace before you are a ship of Theseus? The brain is the hard case. Memories, styles, quirks, associations, the slow-growing coral reef of self. If we could prevent protein tangles, keep blood vessels supple, clear metabolic waste during sleep, maintain myelin sheaths, and cycle synaptic strength with youthful flexibility, then the reef persists. That too is a kind of immortality, not a freeze of time, but a commitment to maintenance so careful that the music continues without slurring. If we are honest, the distance between humans and hydra is not measured in genes alone. It is measured in architecture. Hydra's immortality is a product of simplicity and turnover. Our complexity is expensive. Big brains demand steady glucose and oxygen. Our hearts pump from fetal life to the last breath. Our immune systems juggle recognition and restraint. We live long enough in the wild to raise slow-growing young and teach them. Aging, in this view, is not a bug but a compromise. Trade absolute durability for reproductive strategy, creativity, plasticity, and the risky brilliance of consciousness. Yet, even compromises can be renegotiated. When you watch a team replace a failing valve in a human heart through a catheter instead of splitting the sternum, You are witnessing a renegotiation. When a child receives a new gene through a harmless virus and a fatal disorder stalls, you are witnessing renegotiation. When we learn to dial down mTOR, up autophagy, prune senescent cells, and measure our biological age by methylation signatures rather than candles on a cake, we are in a quiet way drafting new contracts with time. But every contract has fine print. Biological immortality whispers risks that sound like minor characters but could hijack the story if ignored. Cells that refuse to age can cross over into cells that ignore rules. Cancer is, in some sense, immortality gone feral. Suppress inflammation too far, and pathogens slip past. Suppress growth too long, and you fail to repair. Rejuvenate without precision, and you may turn back the odometer but misalign the wheels. Extend life without meaning, and you risk a longer drift rather than a deeper presence. And then there is equity, a technology that allows a fraction of humanity to lengthen life while others struggle to secure clean water is not a ladder, it is a wedge. If we are to chase the horizon of biological immortality, we must decide together whether the road is a private tollway or a public path. Time will not forgive selfishness. It certainly won't forget it. To keep our footing, it helps to hold two truths at once. First, that the machinery of aging is malleable. We are not prisoners to a single script. Already, the average 60-year-old today is metabolically younger than the 60-year-old of a century ago. Second, that malleability is not a blank check for fantasy. Immortal is a word with sharp edges. It tempts us to ignore black swans, accidents, novel pathogens, ineffable biological quirks hidden in long tails. To become biologically immortal would require both conquering the familiar failures of cellular aging and insulating against the unforeseeable. That is not a moonshot. That is a migration to another planet. So, how do we proceed without disappearing into hype or surrender? We look to the places where the map is already detailed, and we add new lines carefully. Hydras, jellyfish, naked mole rats, with their odd resistance to cancer and pain, bowhead whales that sing under Arctic ice for 2 centuries, while their cells patrol mutations with uncommon diligence. Each of these species sketches a method. Some maintain stem cell pools that refresh tissues with clockwork regularity. Some fortify proteostasis, the balance of folding and refolding, so that misfolded proteins are dealt with ruthlessly. Some rebuild telomeres. Some keep DNA repair on a hair trigger. Some live slow in cold water where metabolism whispers and damage accrues like dust instead of hail. Humans cannot move into the Arctic or turn into ribbons of polyps to borrow those traits wholesale. But we can translate mechanisms. If a mole rat's hyaluronic acid long goopy chains between its cells helps keep tumors at bay, perhaps we can learn to make our own tissues more resistant to uncontrolled growth. If whales have variants of DNA repair genes that more tightly supervise damage, maybe we can engineer homologous improvements. If calorie scarcity turns on long-lived programs, perhaps we can flip the same switches without hunger. If certain organisms keep epigenetic noise low, maybe we can invent tools to silence the hiss. There is another truth a biologically immortal species teaches. The line between self-renewal and self-erasure is narrow. Hydra can regenerate because its cells perpetually remember how to be stem-like. We admire that. But for mammals, that path is treacherous. Too much stemness and we court tumors, too little and we calcify. The art, if there is an art to human immortality, will be moderation applied with a surgeon's patience. Imagine a future clinic where, instead of one big intervention, longevity is a cadence. Once a year, a scan of senescent cell burden, a personalized senolytic cocktail, a tune of nutrient signaling based on biomarkers, not fads, a microdose of partial reprogramming for tissues that respond, stem cell boosts for blood and muscle, enzymes that sweep up crosslinks, stiffening your arteries, a weekly date with sleep as sacred as any ceremony, and a covenant with movement strength, balance, endurance, not as exercise, but as the tax we willingly pay for memory to stay lit. This is not fantasy. It is a plausible extension of trends underway if the science holds, if the side effects don't bite, if we learn to be wise mechanics of our own machinery. We will still die, of course, at least for a long while, because we are still animals living on a lively planet. But the shape of a human life could change. Imagine 4 20-year arcs: learning, building, mentoring, audacity. Imagine seeing your great-great-grandchildren share a joke you once told your grandfather. Imagine replacing the regret of not enough time with the more difficult assignment of more time, now what? By 11. The last time I visited the hydra, a graduate student had taped a cartoon above the microscope, a jellyfish with a crown reading Time's Pet. It made me laugh, then think, biological immortality is not an entitlement. It is a negotiation with forces older than seasons. The organisms that have it don't gloat. They simply small step their way through eons, doing what they do in the niches where their tricks work. If humans ever approach that kind of durability, we, too, will have to choose our niche carefully, not an environmental niche, but a behavioral one. We will have to craft a culture where longer lives mean more generosity, not longer hoarding, more curiosity, not longer boredom, more complexity held lightly, not longer grudges carried heavily. Can we become biologically immortal? The wisest answer begins as a refusal to be cornered by the word can. Ask instead, can we learn to repair ourselves more thoroughly, more safely, more fairly? Can we construct routines and technologies that keep the score readable, the instruments tuned, the conductor attentive? Can we grow old without growing brittle? Those are already achievable along a spectrum. The needle moves a little each year. If the needle keeps moving, one day the only thing unusual about 100-year-old will be that they remember when phones still had to be charged overnight. But every threshold is guarded by a question we seldom voice. What is a life for? Mortality forces an economy of attention. You cannot do everything, so you must choose. Immortality, biological or otherwise, is often painted as a release from that economy. But I suspect the opposite. If the horizon recedes, we can afford to choose better. We can apprentice longer. We can forgive before regret hardens. We can comb the knots out of our grief and weave them into something sturdy. We can stop outsourcing meaning to urgency. In the lab's soft midnight, the hydra bends, divides, and regrows. The clock on the wall does not care. The hydra does not care. Time just is. The creature's trick is not defiance. It is harmony. It swims inside time without scraping itself against the walls. Biological immortality, if it ever comes near us, will not feel like a war won. It will feel like that harmony, learned at last. A chorus of cellular chores done so diligently that decay becomes slow, so gentle that repair becomes routine, so integrated that the days are filled with more music than noise. When the lights come on, the hum in the room sharpens from rain to electricity. The graduate student comes back with coffee. They look through the eyepiece and smile, then glance at the calendar, then at the clock. Deadlines and experiments and seminars and the bright, messy, mortal life of a human being. Funny little thing, they say, meaning the hydra. Then, almost the same breath, big day tomorrow. And there it is, the paradox we can carry without breaking. To shape time, you must first love what time currently shapes. If biological immortality is a door, then tonight we have placed our ear against it. We have listened to the stories on the other side, hydras, jellyfish, trees, whales, and asked whether their melodies can be adapted for a different instrument. The handle is cool. It turns a fraction. There is light under the jam. And we, who are both fragile and audacious, know enough now to avoid kicking and instead to learn the lock. Chapter 2. The Art of Staying. Imagine a future clinic with white walls that aren't cold, light that feels like late morning, and a lobby where the magazines are bound journals of your own past biometrics, the arc of your sleep across years, the slow recovery of your knee after you fell off a bicycle in your 30s, the way your blood sugar learned to behave when you finally started eating breakfast. Behind a glass door, a technician's voice is calm as a librarian's. "We're going to update the map today," she says, meaning the atlas of your body at this moment. Senescent cell burden by tissue, telomere distribution, methylation signatures across the genome, mitochondrial output by organ, immune repertoire diversity, stiffness in the arteries, microglial activity in the brain. It is not a ritual of vanity. It is maintenance. You have learned to treat your body like an instrument you mean to keep in tune for a very long time. Biological immortality has always sounded like a proclamation, either hubris or hope, depending on who's listening. But by the time you walk out of such a clinic, you no longer think of it as a switch flipped from off to on. You think of it as a craft, the art of staying. It has rules and tools, mishaps and repairs, apprentices and masters, and like any craft, it insists that we touch reality with both hands. The first rule is humility. Measure before you move. Once upon a time, humans tracked age by birthdays alone. Then came the clocks, hidden in our chemistry methylation patterns that correlate with biological age more closely than candles ever could. Proteomic profiles that whisper whether inflammation hums in the background like a refrigerator, glycan patterns on antibodies that tell whether the immune system skews toward hot or cool. In the clinic, these measurements are not curiosities but traffic lights. They say, you can go farther without harm, or you should slow and service the engine. The second rule is specificity. Every long life is local. The same senolytic concoction that clears troublemakers from one person's joints might irritate another's blood vessels. A dose of mTOR inhibition that buys resilience for one person might suppress wound healing for another. The art lies in learning your tissue's language, how your liver complains, how your muscles ask for attention, how your hippocampus tells you it needs richer sleep, not just more of it. Biological immortality, if we inch toward it, won't be a pill. It will be an education in listening to what your cells have been trying to say since the day you were born. The third rule is cadence. Do a small, good thing for a long time. The interventions that look dramatic on slides, reprogramming pulses, stem cell reseeding organ scaffolds, seated with your own cells may punctuate a life only occasionally. The quiet guardians show up daily. Strength to keep your bones honest, movement to keep mitochondria numerous, protein adequate to repair, fiber to feed the microbial parliament that trains your immune system, sunlight negotiated like a truce, sleep defended like a border. You could live to 100 on theatrics and luck. You cannot live to 150 without the simple chores, the ones that never trend on news feeds because they refuse to be surprising. The fourth rule is repair without rebellion. Cancer is what happens when repair becomes rebellion. A cell's private project hijacks the body's constitution. Any path toward extreme longevity must keep rebellion improbable. This is where we import wisdom from odd corners of nature. Naked mole rats drape their tissues in a kind of biochemical gel, high molecular weight hyaluronan that seems to make their cells less willing to crowd and jostle. Bowhead whales patrol their DNA vigilantly with variants of repair genes that turn mistakes into teachable moments. Humans may not copy these tricks perfectly, but we can converge on the principle. Keep cells bound by community, quick to acknowledge errors, reluctant to fixate on growth for growth's sake. Therapies that accomplish this do not sound like magic. They sound like civics. The fifth rule is meaning. It might seem sentimental to include meaning in a manual, but a brain that cannot justify its days will not care to protect them. Purpose is physiology. When we love people we are responsible for, our stress hormones obey a different grammar. When our work engages our skills just beyond comfort, our dopamine doesn't ricochet. It flows. When we belong to places, towns, gardens, kitchens, workshops, our nervous system negotiates calm with the world outside the skin. If we were to extend human life radically without tending to meaning, we would not have achieved biological immortality. We would have lengthened a corridor and left the rooms empty. Bring these rules together, and a path emerges, not a freeway, but a footpath, widened by many feet. On it, the hazy phrase, indefinite lifespan, sharpens into a practice. You go in once a year for senescent cell reconnaissance. Maybe the first time you try a senolytic regimen, your joints feel looser. Your recovery after a hard hike shortens, and the dull ache in your lower back, the one you attributed to office chairs, doesn't follow you home. A year later, you dial the dose back because the data say you don't need as much. Every couple of years, you schedule a reprogramming pulse under supervision in a facility that monitors you like a pilot on a long flight, easing epigenetic noise in selected tissues' eyes, pancreas, muscle without erasing identity. Once, in your 50s, you accept a stem cell boost for your hematopoietic system because your immune repertoire has thinned. Infections that used to bounce off begin to linger. Afterward, you notice winter colds retreat like summer rain. You do not become immune to catastrophe. Your neighbor breaks a hip because she stepped off a curb checking her messages. A cousin in a rougher part of town can't get time off to go to the clinic, and the practical immortality available to you remains imaginary to him. The river of inequity runs under everything, and you learn as every engineer learns to respect constraints. Advocacy joins your regimen. You vote as if someone else's mitochondria were your own. Meanwhile, the culture bends. People stop describing themselves as old at 60. Instead, they say they have entered their second apprenticeship. Universities do not disappear, but their monopoly on beginnings does. The best potters are 70 and take on students 40 years, their junior who bring them new glazes born of materials science. A 90-year-old opens a bakery without embarrassment. The line wraps the block because the croissants are astonishing. Couplehood becomes more episodic for some and more anchored for others. Both patterns acquire rituals of kindness for endings and renewals. Friendships learn to survive disagreements without the pressure of scarcity. A long life makes it worthwhile to reconcile. Cities change their skeletons. Sidewalks get a shade softer to protect joints. Stairs remain, but rails are sculpted like invitations. Parks acquire weights and bars alongside swings. Crosswalks lengthen their patience. Libraries turn into civic memory palaces where people bring their own archives and add them to a shared one. At funerals, when they happen, the grief is not less because the life was longer. It is different, textured by more stories, less panicked by the sense of theft. And yet, because honesty is the cornerstone of any manual, the word immortal never quite belongs to us. Accidents do not negotiate. Novel pathogens compose original verses, and we hear them whether we want to or not. A reprogramming pulse helps your friend's macular degeneration, but the same protocol makes another's colon crypts restless. A clever therapy that clears protein aggregates from one woman's brain leaves another's sleep brittle. We discover that pushing some hallmarks of aging backward can pull others forward if we aren't careful. We learn restraint the way climbers learn it, one lesson at a time, sometimes with scars. So, where does that leave the question that started this book? Can humans become biologically immortal? If immortal means immune to death, the answer is no, not in any world that resembles this one. We are too entangled with a planet that moves in cycles, too integrated with ecosystems that bite back. If immortal means an organism whose parts never drift beyond salvage, we are not designed that way. We are symphonies, not self-renewing ribbons. Make peace with that, and you clear the fog. But if immortal is allowed to mean indefinitely capable of self-repair under the conditions we can create, then the answer glimmers into a cautious yes, yes, as in approachable, yes, as in asymptote, yes, as in close enough to change what a human life feels like. The road to that yes runs through maintenance, not miracles, through fairness, not hoarding, through 1,000 small agreements with our biology rather than one triumphant overthrow. Someone will object. Why chase years at such cost? Isn't a life's beauty braided with its end? And they are right, partly. Urgency sharpens attention. Deadlines make artists finish. Parents hold their children tighter because they know childhood refuses to linger. But the argument hides a false economy. Length and depth need not be enemies. Give a violinist more years, and she does not play the same piece forever. She grows a library under her fingers. Provide a teacher more time, and he doesn't repeat his first lesson eternally. He refines it, invents 3 better versions, then discards them all for a method kinder to the shy kid in the back row. Extend a life that knows what it's for, and you magnify the very qualities that make mortality bearable. Generosity, craft, humility, humor. There is a moment, late in the day, when the clinic I imagine empties, and the floors smell briefly of citrus from the mop. A man in his 80s, skin the color of teak, laugh lines etched deeply, waits for his ride. He's wearing a shirt that says apprentice because he has a sense of humor and because he just signed up to learn carpentry from a woman half his age. His report glows green in all the places he cares about. "You'll probably outlive me," the receptionist jokes. He shakes his head. "I'll outlive old me," he says, And the line lands softly, not as bravado, but as gratitude. That, more than any mouse study or molecular pathway, is what convinces me. The project isn't to bully time. It's to outgrow versions of ourselves that gave up too early. I think of other rooms. A daughter persuading her mother to try a guided reprogramming round because the family keeps playing the same 4 stories in the kitchen and the old woman wants to remember the 5th. A teacher who restructures the semester because his students' grandparents have started auditing classes and they ask harder questions. A city council meeting where people argue passionately about whether to subsidize yearly senescent screenings for everyone. And the motion passes not because it saves money on hospitalizations, but because it sounds like justice. I also think of dark rooms, a lab where a promising therapy goes wrong for reasons that turn out to be old. Pride, haste, neglect. A journalist writing a careful piece that resists both hype and sneer, and an editor who leaves it alone, trusting readers to sit with nuance. A conversation between 2 friends, one tired of the maintenance, the other insisting that he doesn't have to do all of it now, that we are allowed to cycle, to rest, to come back. In this world, the one we are building clumsily, but with earnest hands, the old rites do not vanish. People still mark the end of things. They still float candles on rivers, scatter ashes in gardens, tell stories on porches when the heat finally lets go. The difference is not the absence of death, but the presence of more life between ordinary beginnings and ordinary endings. Biological immortality, if it means anything for us, means learning to keep the performance close to the score without turning the music mechanical. It means repairing the violins when they complain, not when they collapse. It means keeping the conductor awake. And if we never quite earn the word immortal, we might discover that we don't need it. The hydra taught us that the opposite of aging isn't stubbornness, it's renewal. The jellyfish taught us that going back is sometimes forward in disguise. The long-lived trees taught us that compartmentalization can be a gift. The whales taught us to keep watch over our errors without becoming obsessed with purity. From each we can borrow a verb: renew, rewind, reorganize, repair. Put them together, and the question changes shape. Not, can humans become biologically immortal? But, can we become a species of renewers? If we can, then the practical, beautiful consequences will follow. We will set our cities to the tempo of slow repair. We will teach children to expect grandmothers at their graduations and great-grandfathers at their recitals, and to feel responsibility upward as well as downward. We will use extra decades not to collect more things but to cultivate more skill. We will forgive ourselves for the first drafts of our lives and write second drafts with the tenderness experience earns. Near the end of the day, I return in my mind at least to the lab where the hydra swims under a quiet light. I used to think of that creature as a taunt. See, immortality is trivial. You are the ones who made it hard. Now I think of it as a mentor. It models an attitude. Replace what breaks, keep noise low, avoid panics, tolerate little revolts only as signals that maintenance is due. It does not hoard, it does not hurry, it continues. So will we? We might. Not because we will discover a glittering secret locked in a single gene, but because we will do the human thing. We will learn to hold contradictions without breaking rest and effort, patience and urgency, acceptance and ambition. We will argue and revise and publish and retract and try again, We will tell better stories about why a longer life is not a longer queue at the same shops, but a wider conversation around the same table. If you are listening to this as an audiobook late at night, perhaps you are walking, or cleaning, or lying on your back wondering whether your knees will ache tomorrow. Let me offer you one image to keep. A corridor not of fluorescent lights, but of windows opening to different hours, dawn here, soft afternoon there, the kind of dusk that makes people walk home slower. In that corridor, doors lead to studios instead of wards, and the signs read restoration, apprenticeship, rehearsal, reparations, choir. You walk past them with your hand on the rail, and you feel something you haven't felt since you were 10 and summer seemed like a continent. You feel that there will be enough time not to do everything, not to conquer, but to become. And that is the quiet answer. Biological immortality, if it comes near, if it brushes our sleeves in clinics and kitchens, will not hand us infinity. It will hand us space. It will make repair ordinary. It will ask us to use the room we gain for something other than fear. It will invite us to practice the art of staying with our bodies, in our communities, at our work long enough to be of use to one another. When the book closes, the hydra keeps waving its small mythic arms. Somewhere a patient laces up shoes for an evening walk because the rule about mitochondria hasn't changed. Somewhere a scientist writes, "Not yet," in the margin of a paper and smiles because "not yet" is the most human promise we know. Somewhere a grandparent sets down a cake in front of a child and blows out no candles at all, because candles are for counting and today is for taste. The music doesn't stop. It shifts key. It steadies. It stays.